Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals on what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsintensive.com. In today's conversation, I interview Sophie Schauermann. She's a licensed therapist and parent coach based in Denver, Colorado. Her passion and expertise lie in supporting highly sensitive children and their parents in harnessing their sensitivities into their superpowers. She is the founder of Rooted Rhythm Therapy and Parent Coaching, an organization that guides children and parents in a 12-week-long program of play therapy and holistic parent coaching to find more ease and connection as a family. Sophie is certified in play therapy, EMDR therapy, and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. She has over 10 years of experience working closely with children and families in many settings, including the public school system, community-based mental health programs, and now in private practice. So without further ado, here's my interview with Sophie. Sophie, thanks for being on the podcast today. To get going, the first question I generally ask guests is, what's your take on change? What does it take for an individual to change? What does it take for a system to change?
I love that question. Going deep right away.
It's a big question. Well, take it where
first,
you will.
I actually I use a process of change theory that I learned from my teacher Lisa Dion in Boulder, that I'll describe, and then I can add on like my own unique flavors that I've added to it. But she basically draws out a bell curve, and on one side it's like an orientation to like the problem. In the case of the therapist-client relationship, it's like that getting to know each other and the building trust, and then coming up the bell curve is the working stage. So it's when like the icky parts are coming out and we're seeing more, and we're really just like getting to know the current status of a pattern. And then in that process, we also start to learn that there's other options. Like we'll talk more about the play therapy that I do, but when I'm working with kids, it's like, I just remembered I had a body. Like, what if we remembered that we had a body while we're also in this intensity, and then that can become an option. And then when kids or clients or we in our own processes start to try on those other new ways and realize that it might work better for us, we can reach this point of empowerment, like at the top of that bell curve, where it's like, oh, wow, this could be different. I don't know where I picked this up. Maybe this was what I had added in, but when I'm working with clients, I talk about we look for 80% success. And 20%, like, we're not going to be perfect, but like 80% of the time we're in this more empowered state of change. We're in the change. And then coming down the bell curve is the integration. So it's like we've accessed this new ways, but just as important as making the shift, like how do we embody it and integrate it into the matrix that we live in? And then there's like the goodbye and the closure to that process. And then we do it again, because it's just like the spirals of change that we're in. So I find a lot of relief in accepting that we're constantly in a process of change like that, and we can enjoy different steps on that curve.
Well, it's a very thorough conceptualization, and I like that process orientation of it. There's not this end point of change, right? Like that's I think been a theme with a lot of the guests on the podcast is, when we see therapists and we're trying to make changes in our lives, it's not, we don't just get there, right? It's this process. It's messy at times. And then I also really appreciate that 80-20 split there it's we're not going to have perfection at all as we're, working towards this, these directions we're headed in life. And that allows for that grace and that grace that we all need to show ourselves.
And then personally for me, I think it's just a lot about trust that like we're just naturally on this upward spiral of growth. And so if I can just relax and trust the unfolding, then like the change will happen. And sometimes when I fight for the change sooner than I'm ready, it actually just slows me down a little bit in it. So yeah, like a big part of just my personal life is that faith and trust.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a paradox, isn't it? As we
Yeah.
oftentimes when we really try to make something happen, the opposite can happen. I know with internal family systems I've been getting into, like our protective parts, often what they're scared of happening, what they're trying to avoid happening is what they're playing a part in making happen more. And so, like, we can kind of step back and just, accept those parts. Oftentimes we can shift into change.
Totally. I was just thinking of the book No Bad Parts as we were talking, and then you brought that up. So it's like, yeah, just, but I think it's really challenging.
It,
I can talk I can
yeah.
talk about like not like, accepting all the parts and welcoming them and befriending them, but the internal dialogue is just so programmed towards like, stop that. Like, just the inner critic.
Yes.
And so yeah, I don't really know the answer. I think a lot of us are talking about the right things, but I love finding the teachers that can actually help us embody them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's so true. I often find in these conversations I have on the podcast, it's like conceptually it's easy to paint a picture of like a pretty theory, or these exciting ideas, but oftentimes I think for me at least too, in my personal journey, it's like, okay, this is the process I'm going to engage in personally. Like IFS I've been doing a lot lately, but yeah, it's a lot easier said than done, when I'm with those intense feelings and emotions and those parts that I've kind of pushed to the side. It's a lot easier to talk about that process of accepting and sitting with those parts than actually engaging in that work.
Yeah. And I will say for me, maybe we're going on a tangent, but like just taking self responsibility for the energy in my body
Mm,
has been a really big like propeller of change. Like just a recent example was like, an overwhelming night with family and kids and like watching these old protector parts that then go straight to make my husband like wrong or I get controlling. And we were just talking about how both my husband and I are therapists, for better or for worse. Like you have a family of therapists too. Like sometimes it's a lot of feelings talk, but it is helpful in times because like there's an understanding and a commitment to doing the work. And so there was a really big shift that we've been working on this, but it was like, oh, I'm watching this part of me that's going to do it the old way and like point at him. And instead I could say like, hey, I'm about to do this thing. Can you just be with me in whatever's here? Because obviously there's something here, so much so that I'm trying to protect myself and like play out some relational stuff.
mm,
And he sat with me in like the ickiest feeling I've had in a while. Like it was like I felt like I wanted to throw up. It was like shame. It was like every part of me wanted to avoid it. I was like, what do we have to numb this? Like give me something. And it was like it was such an opening because it was like 20 minutes later the wave ended and I was like, "Oh, we're good."
mm.
And it was just that was like such a moment of empowerment to like have the value on pointing the finger back inside, asking for help to be with it and then letting it move through.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so it was acknowledging what was coming up for you, bringing that to your husband's awareness, and then asking for the help you needed, and I mean just sitting with that, and then there was a shift. The
Yeah.
emotions subsided.
And back in the body, like coming back in the body instead of in the like thinking, blaming, shaming mind. It's like just seeing how clearly those parts of us are just protectors of that energy that's really inside.
Yeah. I know. I know. I
Yeah.
have those parts that go into
Yeah.
thinking and pointing the finger. I think probably most of us have parts that are similar to those.
Yeah, I think it's natural. I think it's also just coming from a country that's based in a lot of religious values. It's like there's like right or wrong, like where it's just really embedded in us that there's a bad or good.
Yeah.
And so you're bad or good at that. I mean, that just leads to pointing the finger. Um, yeah.
No. Well, thanks for sharing those pieces. I love talking about therapist personal experiences. I know like all of our therapist listeners will, relate, and then they're not. That's my favorite part about this podcast. So thanks for. But I'd love to transition to your area of focus of highly sensitive children and play therapy, and wondering if we can start with defining highly sensitive child / highly sensitive person, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Elaine Aron has done decades of research on the highly sensitive person. I highly suggest that a documentary that um, she guided recently called "Sensitive: The Untold Story." And like any quick search on the sensitive person can be a game changer. If you haven't looked into it, I think most therapists are likely highly sensitive. But it makes up 15 to 20% of the population, and it's those of us that just feel more deeply. We take in feelings really strongly and we hold on to them for longer. And what I love about it as like a heart-based person, but also a pretty logical, linear person, there's like literal research on this. So like sensitive people looking at pictures of birthday cakes and puppies or car crashes and snakes, like intensely feeling content, and their brain becomes lit up and stays lit up for longer. And so for the sensitive person to learn about this personality trait, it's not a disorder, and to harness it as their superpower, like, wow, I can sense the subtle, there's a depth of my processing, and not make themselves wrong for it, but learn to work with it is really powerful. One other example I really like to share that I think drives the trait home is there was a study of L's and T's on a computer screen shaped all different ways, like the letter L and the letter T. And the sensitive person could pull out the L and the T, like decipher which one was which super quickly, way more efficiently than the non-sensitive person, but they became more stressed. Like there was more cortisol pumping in their system. So it tells us like there's an exceptionality to this kind of, personality trait, but it also comes with cost. It comes with a need for more self-care, more time to unwind. I can elaborate on some of the like subtraits you see within this trait, but in my work with children and families, I was coming across a lot of kids that have this personality trait. I also work with a lot of gifted children, and there's studies that about 85% of gifted children are also highly sensitive. So I have this sort of like subsection of the population that's like gifted, talented, sensitive, a really unique brain. And these children were becoming too much for their families, like such big feelings. Emotional excitability is one of the terms that that families were overwhelmed by. And then in understanding their children's brains more and how they work and what they need, there's more opportunity to honor who these children are and to help them relax into trusting themselves and trusting their worlds and trusting that they do have unique needs. And the last piece I'll share is there's a well-studied part of this personality trait called differential susceptibility. And it's the idea that sensitive people are more susceptible to their environment than non-sensitive people. So if I have like a really amazing experience, like I am filled with joy. I'm saying I because I'm also highly sensitive. Like it is like expansion and joy. And it really impacts like it could be a lifelong impact of that experience. If I have a negative experience, I might hold on to that trauma more intensely. So for sensitive children, like the hypothesis that I created was like in my work with these kids. And then I found Elaine Aron's research and I was like, oh, I didn't make this up at all. Like at all, so I did like, so that was helpful to be like, I can, I'm teaching a lot of what she shared and blending it with my own work on the nervous system and the brain. I think that's the blend that I really bring in is bridging the brain and the nervous system and gentle parenting and play therapy with this body of work. But this idea of differential susceptibility for parenting means that sensitive kids will be really impacted by the parenting that they get. So if they have shame-based parenting where they're not fully understood or the boundaries are super harsh or there's not enough boundaries, they will really struggle. like to find themselves and to develop appropriately. And if they have good parenting where their traits are understood, the boundaries are loving and clear, the connection is attuned and deep, they will really thrive.
Yeah, so it sounds like with what you're saying that this personality trait is more genetic. Is that right? Is there any research on like the origins, nature versus nurture
Mhm.
with highly sensitive people?
Totally. There's different theories on this. There's been studies on like a genetic component. I'm just wanting to pull up. I have an article that we can share where I
Mm,
go through some of the different research on it. I just don't want to. This is one part that I don't always remember the specifics.
yeah.
But essentially, here we are. Um, there's well, we can share it later. I don't have it at the moment, but there's like some research on neurotransmitter difference, like literally different neurotransmitters that are firing. There was some studies on genetics, and then there's also some hypotheses that it has nothing to do with that. So it's just like anything. Like there's like different opinions and different research that has been done. But um, my conclusion is that for parents who have super feeling kids, the content on the highly sensitive child, like understanding why they might be acting in the ways that they're acting and then parenting appropriately to that is just really helpful.
Mm,
Um, so like some of the specific buckets of subtraits you find are like a depth of processing, like really just like you're in a room with people and you can sense what's happening in a really deep way. There's also sensing the subtle, which is related, but it has to do with the thalamus, which is the gatekeeper of information, literally letting in more information. So there's like that's like biological component, which could or could not be genetic. Overstimulated easily. So like some sensitive kids go to a birthday party and they're able to manage fine because they're just focusing on like the depth and the enjoyment, but some just become really overstimulated. And then there's also emotionally responsive and empathetic.
mm.
Those are kind of the sub traits that you see.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you identify as a highly sensitive person. If it's not too personal, would you mind sharing a bit about how you came to understand this part of your personality? And yeah.
Yeah, my parents have always joked like since I've been little and even in my adult life, it's always the best day or the worst day of my life. Like it's like, and it can happen multiple days. Like I'm just like intense. I'm like, it's the greatest, or like everything's bad. And so it was always kind of a joke. And then I started seeing that all of these sensitive kids I was working with also had this part. And then I read more about it and it's like, oh, that makes sense. But I've always just been such a feeler. Like when I was little, I literally have first memories of walking through preschool and just feeling worried, like feeling like is everyone okay? Like what's, like just really tracking what was happening around me and like taking it all into my body and like trying to figure it out in a way that I think other kids just were just playing, the other 80% of the population just playing and having a good time. And for me, there wasn't as much space to just play and be free because I was really feeling so much. My parents truly did the best they could. Like I would be that kid like up late at night, just like crying, being like, why are like some people not in homes? Like what's how, like just trying to feel like feeling the collective and some of the pain that exists in our world today and from a really young age. And I hear that from a lot of parents of these sensitive kids. Like, why is my 6-year-old talking about death and dying in such an intense way? Or like, you know, cultural problems. And we didn't have my mom like is just so wishes she had this content when I was a child. Like she didn't necessarily know. So they did their best. But it was stressful. Like it was stressful to have so many feelings and not know what to do with them. I eventually developed a pretty intense eating disorder in high school. Like, I think that was just my way of coping and getting through until I could get really good healing, which, my family also supported with. And then since I was 16, I've been on like a pretty deep healing journey of learning how to work with my depth, like moving to Colorado and finding amazing healers across the spectrum of like licensed therapists to more like energetic healers, um and I'm super grateful for the depth of some of the pain that I felt, because I feel like really integrated in who I am. Of course, it's a work in progress, but I feel like having had that journey, it really supports me in like trusting children's journeys.
Mm.
And when parents are having a really hard time with the pain that their children are in, I have this really deep rooted belief that, this is so cliche, but like their pain is their gain, or like they're like the depth, like they're like another way of looking at it is like the sacred wound. It's like there's a wounding that's happening for them that if they have the right support to move through it and integrate it, it will just become part of their power.
Mm.
And that we don't have to run away from those pains and the depth of those processes.
Yeah. What you're talking about earlier of that trusting in the journey, trusting in like people's ability to heal, and that comes out of your own experience of
Mm-hmm.
healing and growth. And I'm curious, if you look back at your healing journey, are there like some experiences that were just like really pivotal understandings that you came to that really were a part of that shift in your healing journey?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Let me think which parts I could share.
Yeah.
Um, hmm. I think finding my body has been really important, and it's a continued journey. Like I grew up on the East Coast where everything's very intellectual, and it really, how much you know really matters. And like in the, finding yoga and marathon running at one time, and like just different things like where I could find my body. I was like, wow, I have a hip. Like I have this body that has information. And I mean, I think it's, like I said, a lifelong journey to stay connected to my body. For me, I don't think everyone's like that, but I tend to go more to the head. Um, and so that was a pivotal shift, realizing how important it was that I come down into my body, because when I'm in my body, anxiety and fear is not as present. Like my body knows more truth, that like the anxiety and fear is just speaking of protector parts. Um, so that was really pivotal. And then I also think that finding conscious marriage and family was a huge shift for me, like finding belonging in this family that like I get to consciously choose how we operate, and being in a really safe container with my husband where we are committed to healing together, and like working through our own paths together. That's been really supportive, both in like feeling, like I said, that sense of belonging and safety, but also in responsibility and purpose. Like I really, the how much I love them, um, makes me want to be the most responsible evolved version of myself and not stuck in wounded parts.
Mm. That commitment that you have and your husband has to uh, taking responsibility for these protective parts as they come up, and to healing and growing together.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's been like hard work. We have a lot of support to like look at where we're projecting old stuff on each other. But ultimately, like when we find those sweet spots of more ease, and we like have worked really hard to identify our values together, like our shared values, and how we can allow those to drive us and our family. It just feels like a meaningful life. Like I'm just really grateful, honestly, to be in this life. And I know
Aw.
we'll get to it, but in the parenting course that I guide parents through, there's a lot on like the sensitive child and how to set boundaries, like some of even the basics, morning and evening routines, like what can support the structure. And then by the end of it, it really dives into like parent self healing, self care and regulation, lineage healing, conscious co-parenting. So like basic skills for proper communication and healing together and being on a united front. And then the last module gets into intentionally weaving your family's future. And I share a lot of research on positive psychology and the flow state and like stepping out of the victim role and into empowerment and like choosing like I mean, I'm coming from a social work background. I'm always aware. It was like drilled into me to be aware of our privilege, power, and all of this. But like most people taking this course in a position to have space and resource to dive into it, like it's like you have the power to choose wellness, and that's a powerful choice, or you could not, you know. And so I've heard from families that have been all the way through just a sense of empowerment that they get to choose not to be in a state of like victim or negativity, and to support their sensitive kids that are so susceptible to stepping into what's really well.
Absolutely. And I want to dive more into that parenting piece. But before we do, could you share, so with the highly sensitive child, you talked about is great strength that they have of being so attuned to their environment. And that's at the same time very difficult when they're in environments that are stressful. And they definitely will be in this world we live in, even if it's not in the family. Could you share more about like some of the bigger difficulties that highly sensitive children face?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's easy for these kiddos to get stuck in negative thought loops, like to maybe feel like to sense what might not be right and in integrity with what's happening in their family systems or their school systems, but not have the universal view or even like the brain development to just see, like, just to observe that this is what's happening in their world. And so instead, they point the finger back on themselves and they feel like something must be wrong with me. Like I'm not enough. I'm just damaged. Like it become, and then we get stuck there, like in the brain and the body. And so I see that a lot. I see pretty extreme language, which usually scares parents. Like, I just want to die. Don't you just not want me? And it feels really different than suicidal ideation and, you know, like real risk that I worked with in the past. Like, it really just feels like, like an effort to communicate the depth of the pain that's being felt. Um, and then I also actually see like pretty significant low self-esteem. Um, Even though like there's every reason for these children to be so proud of who they are, but because they feel different than the other kids around them that are just like playing and operating on a more surface level space, it's sort of this feeling of like, well, I'm the black sheep, I'm different, and therefore I'm not as good as. Um, so it's super difficult to parent children that are struggling with all of those things when you can also see their exceptionality.
Mm. And so with let's say a parent is listening and they're like, my child definitely is fits into this highly sensitive camp. What are some of the most important things for them to know and to focus on?
Yeah, so I really encourage parents to trust their children's process, like to allow them to have the pain and trust that they'll move through. Like, you know, a child that's in such significant shame and isolation, when they find pride and belonging, it will be powerful. So it's like, don't try to fix, support them in like what it's like for them to go through that and trust the journey. Um, and then like just really holding space and validating experience and not minimizing it. Like for sensitive kids, it's like the intensity is intense, you know. For any child, I always like to say for like a child size problem for a child is a really big deal. So like a car getting stolen from the sandbox for a child is like us getting our car stolen from the parking lot.
Mm.
And so like meeting the magnitude of what's happening for these kids without minimizing and validating, and also offering that trust. And then like on top of that, I just, my two biggest things with any family that I work with are finding the right balance between like really authentic attunement and connection, not like the mom you think you should be that's just like, hi, I'm here, I'm playing even though I'm not really here. It's like, no, like I'm here with you energetically in my body, in this moment, this is connection, and then also loving boundaries, like just really offering containment and rules and structures for children to just like know what the boundary is. Like there's a whole module on this in my course, but I talk about how like a glass of water without the glass is just a puddle of water on the floor. Like we have to know what the structure around the energy in ourselves in our homes are to provide space for the energy to move properly.
That makes sense. And I know that structure really brings a great deal of safety and for children. And another piece you touched on that I just wanted to highlight was the not going into that fixing role. And that's just a helpful piece for anyone, in a relationship. I think all of us have that tendency in our relationships at work and at home with our spouses and then with children, to when people are talking about problems and difficulties, to just go to here's the solution. I know I do that all the time. People do it to
Yeah.
me all the time. And sometimes that, I want that, but other times I do just want someone to listen to me. And so what a
Yeah.
key and what a challenging thing to do, but also a key piece.
Yeah, it's sort of just a stress response. Like
Mhm.
you're just in your own trauma trying to make it different instead of being with what's here. But I think it's also okay. Like I like to look at it as like my go-getter part. Like I
Yeah.
am a go-getter. And so I'm like, I'm gonna like create this whole thing, or let's make a new behavior chart for bedtime. And like none of it's wrong. I just feel like if parents are really only stuck in that, and I work with a lot of analytical parents, like lawyers, doctors, politicians, and they are like really spending a lot of time there, and their sensitive kids really need them to come back into their hearts and their bodies and into the energy of the moment.
Yeah. So yeah, and I love that, not demonizing those parts. Those are good parts of us that,
Mhm.
but there's times where yeah, just the focus should be on being in the moment, being in the present with our child.
Yeah, something I hear from a lot of parents that have been through my programs are like they the actually holding space for the feelings became not as scary as they thought they were. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, I thought this would be like a 3 hour thing where I had no control. And then once I learned to really just be there for the anger, be there for the grief, it was like a 12-minute thing. Like, it's okay, And then we moved through and we all played outside. And so just becoming that space holder. I even teach parents to like put both feet on the floor and like get in their bodies when their children are having, and like into their roots, like grounded when their children are having a big feeling, so that they can just feel supported, be offered co-regulation, and like we move through the feeling and it's no big deal. And thank you so much for feeling that, because oftentimes sensitive kids are just the conduits for any feelings that aren't being felt in the family system.
Hmm.
um, and so we have to thank them for that. It's like, great, I don't really know how to access anger, so bring it on. Like
Yeah.
someone's gonna have to feel it, you know?
What a gift, and a difficult gift that the
Mhm.
children give us with that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow. And are there other pieces in this parenting training that you touch on outside of the boundaries and doing your own work, making yourself available in the present moment amidst the parts of us that are triggered when we're around our children?
Yeah, it's really thorough. Like I interviewed a whole bunch of parents that had been through my process and had, experienced real shifts into wellness. And I actually transcribed all of the interviews, and then I pulled out the common themes, like of what had really worked for these families, and then expanded on them. Like it became like 100-word Google Doc. And like it's just like everything I had been sharing with families over these years that really worked. So, you'll get content on like attachment patterns, and how to match the different attachment patterns and where they're coming from. I don't know, Eric Erickson's developmental stages, like really understanding what would be appropriate for your child, and then what might be happening for them when they regress, and how to support them through that. Where shame, like there's a whole section on shame and where that comes from, and how we can support it and not run away from it. So yeah, I'm sure we can share. There's like there's just descriptions of all of this, but it's pretty thorough content and a blend of the heart-based understanding and principles that will support you in the softening, like, trust and honor your child's process as a mirror of your own process. Like, we're growing and healing and integrating together. And then also like the science and research of the nervous system and brain development and what's happening when there's dysregulation and how we can come back to center. What's also really cool is that there's a dad in our community here in Denver who's also a music producer, and he developed a meditation track for the course. So it's
Wow.
like embedded with like dad magic, and he was super on board with the vision. And so that meditation track offers like there's a grounding meditation before each module to get the body and mind center to take in the information. And then there's an embodiment integration after each module that's 14 minutes to help like land and integrate whatever was just learned. So it's kind of it is a therapeutic process.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Um,
Yeah.
and you talked about shame there and supporting people in shame, and that's an area of interest for me because based on my own experiences, it's been one of the more difficult feelings and like driving parts of me with my internal system, and what has been really problematic in different spheres of my life at points. And then in my clinical experience, seeing shame as almost always like one of the central driving forces in problems that people bring to therapy. What you talked, I think, about as parents not running from shame, but holding space there and being grounded and leaning into creating space for your child to feel shame, to talk about shame. Is there anything else that you have found in your clinical practice or with parenting that's helpful in supporting young people or just people in general with shame?
Well, it's unavoidable. Like the Erickson developmental stages that I mentioned, like the 2 and 3-year-old stage is shame and guilt versus autonomy. Like, am I going to be in like, this is when tantrums are happening, potty training. It's like, am I going to be stuck in like shame and ick, or am I going to trust that I can do it? And I'll bounce back and forth between those multiple times. And then as adults, we all regress back to 2 or 3-year-old stage sometimes. So it's just something that we'll all experience and we don't have to be so scared of, but it's just about moving back towards the autonomy and the trust. Um, and as parents, certainly not causing more of it. Like if it's like you are bad, you're making a child feel like they're a bad person because of an impulse that they had, will just create like isolation. And then in isolation, the shame will get bigger, which will then turn to anger and outbursts. And it's just this cycle where like nothing good really happens. So I really encourage like that we go the opposite way of just like connection and unconditional positive regard in our relationships and our parenting and in the therapy space, so that we can soften around the shame, get some information, and then just kind of move forward.
Nice.
The other big breakthrough I've had, like literally in the past week, I'm like really excited about this one, is understanding that. So, like, I have an anxious attachment style. My husband has an avoidant. I get into like action, and it's almost like I'm like chasing him. Like, it's like he needs space. This is just like
Uh-huh.
the energy, and I'm chasing him. And we're realizing, like, he's seeing this too, that the avoidant personality type comes with quite a bit of shame, because it's like I'm going to go over here and just like be alone and kind of make this all about my shame and what I did wrong and I'm just not good enough. And it actually can turn to anger at different times. Whereas my anxiety gets so big that I'm just like unwilling to be wrong. And I'm just like, you're wrong, like you're wrong. Like I point that. And so it's been so powerful to just be respectful of that shame that's in this space. And for me, as the one that leans towards more anxiety, to soften and say, like, I'm here, like, take your space, but like, this is not like you are loved essentially. And like,
Mm.
this is, like you're accepted. And then for Kendall, watching those patterns more and like knowing it's in his lineage due to trauma and things, that like, oh, this shame isn't really true. Like maybe something icky happened here, but I'm not bad or wrong. Like I can trust myself. This insecurity isn't really mine. It's like we're not avoiding the shame, but we're just working with it in a new way where we're not identifying with it so much.
Mm. Acknowledging that it's there, but that it came from experiences and or maybe a legacy of shame
Mm-hmm.
in the family. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's it seems like from what I'm hearing you say is like what's been really helpful and central to your work, but then also to your personal relationships is one, that unconditional positive regard and acceptance when you can notice one of that you're maybe in that place of anxiety, anxious attachment, pursuit, when you can kind of notice that and then step into a place of being more grounded and accepting of the people you are with, holding space for them, and yeah, not trying to fix or change, but just that it's such a simple concept. It's so hard to do, but that's so powerful, isn't it? When we can just accept the people, even if they're extreme around us.
Hmm. And just the coming together, like it's not you versus me, it's like us versus a kind of weird world, like
Yeah,
things are intense out there. And same with like in the family systems, it's like it be like families are stressed. Like, most of these kids I've worked with have been through COVID and everyone was impacted differently at that time. And so it's like we've all been through a lot together and let's all like come down and co-regulate together instead of being at each other or like hyper focusing on some relation within the family system that doesn't feel perfect.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, that's great. Well, we're getting towards the end of the interview, and before we would kind of wrap up, is there anything that's popped up for you throughout this conversation that you're wanting to share that we didn't touch on?
I just really appreciate it. I appreciate, yeah, the opportunity to connect and talk about these things. And yeah, I just feel humbled. Like I'm grateful to have been around a lot of families. I have about 100 parents have been through the course since it launched in October, and I'm super proud of that. This one was like 9 months. It was like a birth.
Yeah.
I woke up one morning and was like, I think I should start typing something out. And then I started taking all the notes and it just kind of happened. And so um, I'm really excited about being able to take all of this content that I've been learning since literally my first day in undergrad in Boston. At Tufts University, I was in an intro to child development class. And it's just kind of, I think that's when I learned Erickson's developmental stages. And it's just kind of built on itself since then. And I'm just really excited that after spending so many years with kids in the therapy room and like not knowing what to do to try to help their parents understand them more and just actually feeling really burnt out because I literally didn't know how to help them. It was just like, yeah, it's people at home don't understand you. I'm sorry. Like I finally feel like I have enough parents on board to say like, yeah, we're committed to looking inside at ourselves and shifting the container with which our child exists. And so I'm just grateful that I get to do it more this way now. And I feel excited for these sensitive kids whose parents are really willing to look at supporting them in a different way.
That's great. And I'd love for you to share a bit more about the course, like where, if someone's interested, they would find it. Is it just for parents of highly sensitive children, or is it more general? Any parent it would be helpful for?
Yeah. It's designed for the sensitive child. There's a quiz on my website. If you just end up on my website, rootedrhythm.com, ROOTEDRHYTHM, you'll be able to navigate through and find all of this. Like if you go to the tuned in course page, you'll get all the information. If you go to the blog, you'll find a whole bunch of writing on the sensitive child and things like the difference between the highly sensitive child and a child with ADHD or anxiety, sensory processing disorder. And there's even a 22 question quiz that can help you really decipher if your child is sensitive. It's designed for parents of sensitive kids. I feel like if that's you, this will be like really, really supportive. I have heard from almost all the parents that have taken it that it helped with parenting their non-sensitive children,
Mm.
very much so. But it is made for the sensitive child. And yeah, through my website, through the contact page, you can reach out to me. I do consults to see if it's the right fit, because I want to make sure that if you're investing in the process, um, that it will work and that it will feel really good, and that it will be a fit for how your heart and mind are operating, or you might just feel like this is it and I'd love to dive in. And the something I'm excited about that I'm just adding in next week, based on feedback from people that had been through, is that starting next Wednesday, well, so who knows when you'll be listening to this, but this will probably be happening. Weekly, I'll be doing group calls with any parents that are enrolled in the course, so that you can come on and feel connected to other parents that are in
Nice.
a similar situation. And it's just like, asking questions, sharing some content, grounding together. And so I'm really excited, to like source that connection together for families that are in similar experiences.
Wow. Well, I'm so happy you're doing this work. I mean, that group work sounds so exciting and is so important for people to be able to lean on each other as they're engaging in these processes. And then I love that you've got this as a resource for parents, because it's therapy, regular therapy is very expensive, and if you can afford it, it can be, I think the perfect world is for, a whole family to have a family therapist and then individual therapists during challenging seasons, and, or, trying to figure out how to parent best. But this seems like a very accessible way for people to get some hard skills, and maybe to do in conjunction with their own therapy, or maybe not. Maybe this is helpful and therapeutic enough for them to step into this parenting, really being attuned to their child's needs. Because as you're talking about earlier, with highly sensitive children, they're such sponges and so attuned to their environment. So being able to go through this process of figuring out how to best meet that child's needs is so important.
Yeah, and if some of the approach and how we were speaking, is speaking to you, but you're not sure about the whole course or the highly sensitive child, I do have a mini course that's just called Parenting Essentials, and it's really just focused on like the types of parenting, the attachment styles, and the parent self-healing, self-care, and regulations. So that's a really good way. Some parents have just dipped their toes in and done a little self-work, without going in the full dive of learning all about the sensitive child and all of that. So yeah, I'm just really grateful to get to connect with you and share. And I hope that one part of this conversation landed in a way that can serve, the children of someone listening.
Oh, I'm sure it has, and I'll be sure to link your website in the show notes, and any other contact information you'd like to give folks.
Yeah, you can find me on the website through the contact page, or you can email me directly, Sophie, Sophie, at rootedrhythm.com. So ROOTEDRHYTHM.com.
Perfect. And then the last question I like to ask guests is, what's a message of hope you'd like to leave listeners with today?
Hmm, I love that. I just immediately went to a moment where my stepdaughter looked outside our window of we had moved like a year ago or so, and there were these two trees, and she like immediately pointed out like, that one's the tree of love, it's going to remind us love, and this one's the tree of hope, it's going to remind us of hope.
No.
And she's a sensitive child herself and has this depth, and she always seems um to bring exactly like what we need to hear, and the reminder that like it can be well, and there can be hope. And so I hope that this can be a reminder like of the brilliance and the wisdom that the sensitive children around you can offer,
Mm.
if you're listening and if we give space to that. So yeah, like the message of hope is that even if your sensitive child is feeling like a burden, which is natural, and like the intensity is getting a lot, to remember that like you've been given a huge gift to have a
Mm.
child with this trait.
No, that's beautiful. The
Yeah.
the tree of love and the tree of hope. That's
Yeah. Like,
nice.
yeah. So I love it.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, Sophie, thanks so much for your time and for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.